Hey guys, welcome to Skeleton Guy Stories. Today we're diving into something chilling, straight from Reddit. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more. Update. I heard my neighbor being killed 3 days ago. Now something's watching me, and I can't call for help. I'm typing this on 2% battery. My hands are shaking so bad I keep having to delete and retype every other word. I know I should call someone, anyone, but I can't. My phone's been sitting here beside me this whole time, but every time I try to dial 911, my throat closes up, and I start hyperventilating. I know how pathetic this sounds. Someone died because I was too anxious to call for help, and now I'm still too broken to save myself. The worst part is, I've been like this my whole life. At school, I'd rather go hungry than ask the lunch lady for a spoon. In college, I dropped a class because participation was 30% of the grade. When I got this apartment, I chose it specifically because they had an online payment system. No need to talk to anyone, no awkward small talk with neighbors, just me and my safe, quiet routine. I thought I was being smart. Now I realize I was just practicing for my own death. 3 days. 3 days since I last left this bed. My muscles have grown weak. My sheets are stained with sweat and spilled water from the bottle I keep nearby. Empty granola bar wrappers litter the floor. The only food I've managed to choke down. The hunger pang stopped yesterday. Now there's just a hollow emptiness in my stomach that matches the one in my chest. I can't leave. I won't leave. Because she's there. Always there. I remember every detail of that first night. The temperature had dropped suddenly, unusual for this time of year. I was in my usual spot, alone in my dark room, headphones on, trying to drown out the world with white noise. I'd developed this routine over the years. White noise to block out the neighbor's TV, blue light filter on my phone, weighted blanket pulled up to my chin. A perfect cocoon of isolation. That's when I heard the first scream from next door. Old Mrs. Chen's voice piercing through our shared wall. But there was something else too. Underneath her screams, I heard something. A sound like bones cracking, and a low, wet breathing that couldn't have been human. My hands started shaking immediately. The thought of calling 911, of having to talk to operators, police, paramedics. My throat closed up just thinking about it. I've lived in this building for 3 years and have never spoken to a single neighbor. Even Mrs. Chen, I only knew her name from the mailbox labels. Sometimes I'd hear her singing old Chinese songs through the wall, or smell whatever she was cooking for dinner. Once she tried to bring me leftover dumplings. I pretended I wasn't home, watching through the peephole as she eventually gave up and left them by my door. I threw them away the next morning, too anxious about the interaction that would follow if I accepted them. What kind of person does that make me? The phone felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my hand. I kept unlocking it, staring at the keypad, then locking it again as panic overwhelmed me. Help! Someone, please! Her voice cracked on the last word. Then I heard it, a sound like nails dragging across the floor, getting closer to her. Something was in there with her. Something was hunting her. The scraping sound reminded me of the stray cats that sometimes fought in the alley behind our building, but deeper, more deliberate, like something large pulling itself across the floor. 1 minute passed. The dragging sound stopped. Mrs. Chen's gasps became more desperate. Through the wall, I heard what sounded like hair dragging across the floor, accompanied by that wet, rattling breathing. The sound was wrong, like someone trying to breathe through a mouthful of water, but slower, almost rhythmic. My own breathing started to match its pace, without me realizing it. 2 minutes. The temperature in my room dropped suddenly. I could see my breath in the air. More crashes came from next door, like Mrs. Chen was trying to escape something. The sounds were getting weaker. Just dial the numbers, I pleaded with myself, but the anxiety was paralyzing. My whole body felt numb, my chest so tight I could barely breathe. I started counting in my head, a technique my old therapist taught me for panic attacks. 1, 2, 3. The numbers kept slipping away, replaced by that wet, dragging sound. 3 minutes. Mrs. Chen's final scream was cut short. Then silence. Complete, absolute silence. Not just quiet, but the absence of sound, like the air itself was holding its breath. In that silence, I heard it. The sound of something being dragged across the floor, towards our shared wall. Towards me. There was a pause, and then a soft thud against the wall, like something pressing against it, testing it. They found her body the next morning. The official report said heart attack, but I saw them carrying her out. The body bag wasn't flat enough for just a heart attack victim. And the walls. Someone said there were claw marks all over them, deep grooves in the drywall, too uniform to be from a struggle. They looked almost methodical, like whatever made them was taking its time, enjoying itself. I spent that entire day huddled in my apartment, lights off, pretending I wasn't home when the police knocked. I couldn't face them, couldn't handle their questions. But mostly, I couldn't stop thinking about those sounds I'd heard. That thing that had been in there with her. The wall between our apartments felt paper thin now. I kept pressing my ear against it, listening for any sound from the other side. There was nothing. Just that heavy, waiting silence. My mind started playing tricks on me. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak of the building settling made me jump. I tried ordering delivery, but couldn't make myself answer the door when it arrived. The thought of opening that door, of something waiting on the other side, I'd rather starve. That evening, I couldn't eat, couldn't focus. The TV was just noise. The internet a blur of meaningless images. Around midnight, I finally took 2 sleeping pills, desperate to escape the memory of those wet, dragging sounds. As I waited for them to kick in, the temperature started dropping again, just like it had during those 3 minutes. I pulled my blanket tighter, but the cold seemed to seep through it, settling into my bones. At exactly 2:17 a.m., my breath came out in visible puffs, and the water glass on my nightstand frosted over. That's when I noticed the smell, not the medical scent from Mrs. Chen's apartment, but something older, like wet earth and decay. It reminded me of the time I found a dead bird in my parents' garden as a kid. That sweet, sickly smell of something that should have been buried long ago. I was lying on my side, facing the wall, when I felt it. A presence, weight shifting on the mattress behind me. The air grew so cold it burned my lungs. Through the reflection in my phone's black screen, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood freeze. She stood at the foot of my bed, facing the wall. Not Mrs. Chen. Something else. Something that had never been human. Her face. God, that face. An unnatural, stretched grin that split her features almost ear to ear, teeth gleaming too white, too sharp in the darkness. Matte black hair hung in wet ropes around her face, framing that terrible smile. Her skin was pale, almost luminescent in the dark, stretched tight across her skull-like features. But what haunts me most was the look in her eyes, wide, unblinking, filled with a sort of manic glee as she stared at the wall. The same eyes Mrs. Chen must have seen in her final moments. I quickly squeezed my eyes shut, praying she hadn't noticed my phone's reflection. I pulled the covers over my head like a child, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Minutes passed. Hours. The only sound was my own pulse thundering in my ears. When I finally gathered the courage to peek out again, she was still there, in exactly the same position. She hasn't moved since. Time has lost all meaning. Day bleeds into night and she remains. That's the worst part. The absolute stillness. No breathing. No movement. Just an endless patient vigil. The silence is deafening. Sometimes I catch myself holding my breath, straining to hear anything. A shift in position. A rustle of fabric. But there's nothing. Just that oppressive silence and the weight of her presence. Sometimes, in the darkest hours of night, I hear that wet, dragging sound again. Getting closer. Always closer. It seems to come from inside the walls now, moving through the building like blood through veins. Last night, I swear, I heard it in the ceiling above me, dragging itself in slow circles over my bed. My phone's at 1% now. People knock on my door sometimes. Police, concerned neighbors, the building manager. But their voices seem to come from another world, muffled and distant, like I'm underwater. How could I explain what's happening? Who would believe me? The phone's right here. The numbers are right there. But even now, facing death, I can't make myself dial. My social anxiety has become my executioner. I've been lying here pretending to sleep for what feels like eternity. My body screams for movement, for relief, but I dare not shift more than necessary. The sheet over my head is my only barrier between us, thin as it may be. I keep thinking about Mrs. Chen's last moments. Did she see it coming? Did she have time to feel afraid? Or was she like me, paralyzed, helpless, watching as death crept closer? The apartment feels different now. Colder, emptier, yet somehow crowded, like the air itself is pressing down on me. The shadows in the corners seem deeper, more substantial. Sometimes I think I see movement in them. A flicker of pale skin. A flash of that terrible smile. But when I look directly, there's nothing there. Just the endless, patient presence at the foot of my bed. Last night, I heard sounds from next door again. Not Mrs. Chen's voice this time, just that wet, dragging noise. Moving back and forth, like it's waiting, like it's enjoying this. The sound has a pattern now, almost like footsteps. Drag, thump, drag, thump. The rhythm of it burrows into my brain until I catch myself swaying slightly in time with it. The mattress has been slowly dipping where she stands, an ever-deepening impression of her presence. I keep my breathing slow and steady, maintaining this facade of sleep. But something's different now. The pressure on the mattress feels closer. Has she moved? No, impossible. She never moves. Yet somehow the cold feels nearer, that decay smells stronger. I can't take it anymore. Despite every instinct screaming not to, I slowly lower the sweat-soaked sheet just enough to peek out. The room is empty, but there on the wall, carved in jagged letters that seem to writhe in the darkness, is a message. I know you're not sleeping. Hey, if you made it to the end and enjoyed the story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. There's plenty more to come. Thanks for watching, and good luck.